Rain poured over the dusty countryside, the kind that made the earth smell like forgotten memories. A man in torn clothes, with mud-caked boots and a straw hat shading half his face, walked through the small village carrying a sack of grain. To everyone, he was just Eli the poor farmer, quiet, humble, and always the first to lend a hand when someone's ox went missing or a roof leaked during the storm. But what no one knew was that Eli was living a lie, a deliberate one. His real name was Elias Thorne, the reclusive heir to Thorne Industries, a billion-dollar global conglomerate that everyone in the capital city worshipped. Years ago, he'd walked away from the flashing cameras, the fake smiles, and the vultures dressed in silk. He'd left everything behind after one devastating betrayal. The night he caught his fiancée and his business partner conspiring to take over his company and erase him from his own empire. He had disappeared without a trace. The media declared him missing. His board fought over his inheritance. But Eli didn't care. He had wealth that could buy a country. Yet what he wanted was peace, something money had always denied him. In the little village of Meadow Ridge, peace finally found him. The villagers didn't know or care who he was. They saw him working the soil with his bare hands, eating plain bread, smiling softly at the sunset. They called him the farmer with kind eyes. He became a part of their world, the man who fixed broken carts and shared his harvest with hungry children. But everything changed the day Clara Beaumont arrived. She was a journalist from the city, elegant, sharp, with a pen that could destroy reputations, and a heart that had long stopped believing in good men. She came to Meadow Ridge to write a story about rural poverty, but what she found instead was a man who didn't fit the picture at all. His hands were rough, but his posture was regal. His speech was simple, yet his eyes, they held something vast, something that made her uneasy. One afternoon, while she watched him mend a fence, she asked, "You don't seem like someone who belongs here, Eli. What's your story?" He smiled faintly, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. "I belong where the earth still remembers my name," he said softly. That night, as the village gathered around the fire, Clara noticed something. The way people looked at Eli with respect that went beyond his work. There was something magnetic about him, something quietly commanding. When a child fell and scraped his knee, Eli knelt and comforted him with the tenderness of a father. When the elderly farmer, Mr. Graham, lost his crops to the storm, Eli wordlessly brought bags of seed to his doorstep before dawn. Who was this man? Days turned into weeks, and Clara couldn't stop wondering. The curiosity became obsession. She followed him one morning to the edge of the forest, a place no one dare go. Hidden among the trees stood an abandoned farmhouse, but inside, Clara discovered something shocking. Stacks of old newspapers with headlines about Elias Thorne's disappearance, a gold watch engraved with the Thorne family crest, and a leather-bound notebook filled with sketches, blueprints, signatures, and notes about business expansions worth billions. Her heart stopped. She turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway, watching her quietly. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, his tone calm but laced with something heavier. Years of silence breaking apart. Clara's voice trembled. "You're Elias Thorne, the billionaire who vanished." He didn't deny it. "I was, once. But why live like this? Why hide here?" Eli stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Because when you've had everything, you realize how little it means when you can't trust the people who love you. Out here, no one wants my money. They only see me." Clara's throat tightened. "And what happens when they find out who you are?" His gaze softened. "Then I'll lose everything again. But at least this time, I'll lose something real." For days after, Clara battled with her conscience. As a journalist, this was the story of a lifetime, exposing the missing billionaire hiding, as a poor farmer could revive her fading career. But as a woman, as someone who had come to feel something for him, it was a moral war she didn't know how to win. And then came the night the village was struck by disaster. A flash flood tore through Meadow Ridge, destroying homes, drowning crops, and leaving dozens stranded. Clara watched in shock as Eli led the rescue efforts, risking his life to pull people from the raging water. His shirt was torn, his hands bleeding, but he refused to stop. When the flood receded, the villagers had lost nearly everything, except hope. and that hope stood before them in muddy clothes, exhausted but unbroken. The next morning, Eli quietly disappeared from the village. When Clara followed the muddy tracks leading out of Meadow Ridge, she found herself standing before a convoy of black cars parked by the dirt road, vehicles far too expensive for this place. Out stepped men in suits, security teams, and a man in a tailored coat. Eli, no longer the humble farmer, but the billionaire reborn. He turned to her, his eyes filled with both apology and something deeper. "It's time they knew," he said quietly. And as the sun rose over broken fields, the villagers gathered to see a fleet of trucks arriving, loaded with supplies, tools, and construction materials. A banner unfurled. Thorn Foundation, rebuilding Meadow Ridge. The poor farmer they had loved was the billionaire the world had lost. Clara watched as Eli spoke to the crowd, humble, sincere, and real. Not a man flaunting power, but a man redeeming it. Yet beneath that calm, she saw the storm in his eyes, the weight of secrets not yet told, the scars of betrayal that still haunted him. And as she stepped closer, she realized his story wasn't over. It was only beginning. Clara stood among the villagers, the air heavy with disbelief and awe. People whispered his name, Elias Thorn, some with confusion, others with reverence. The children who once ran to him with muddy hands and bright smiles now hesitated, unsure whether to call him Mr. Thorn or Eli. But he silenced them all with a gentle wave of his hand and a calm voice. "Nothing has changed," he said, his tone low but steady. "I'm still the same man who worked beside you, who ate at your tables, who owes this village more than you can imagine." Yet Clara could see it, the invisible line forming between him and the people he loved. The villagers bowed their heads respectfully, but their laughter, their ease, their closeness, it was already slipping away. Later, when the crowd dispersed and the trucks began unloading supplies, Clara approached him. He was standing near the edge of the newly ruined fields, the sun striking his face in a way that made him look like two men at once, the farmer and the empire behind him. "So this is the real you," she said softly, stepping closer. He looked at her, expression unreadable. "It's one version of me," he said, "but I'm not sure which one's real anymore." Clara folded her arms. "They'll never see you the same way again." "I know." His gaze drifted toward the village. "But at least they'll be safe now. Their homes will stand. Their children won't go hungry this winter. That's what matters." "But you lied to them," she said, her voice catching between accusation and pity. "I didn't lie," he replied quietly. "I just didn't tell them what didn't matter." She stared at him for a long moment, trying to read the man behind the calm. "It matters now," she said finally, "because the world will come looking for you." He turned toward her then, really looking at her. "And you'll be the one to tell them, won't you?" Her breath hitched. "Eli," he smiled, faint but knowing. "I've seen that look before, the one between duty and conscience. You think I don't recognize it? You're a journalist. Clara, you came here for a story. Now you have one that could make you famous." The word stung, because he was right. Every instinct in her screamed that she should publish it. The lost billionaire found living as a farmer in hiding, helping the poor, rediscovering himself. It would be front-page news everywhere. But there was something inside her that couldn't bear to betray the quiet dignity of the man standing before her. "I didn't come for that anymore," she said at last. "Not after I met you." He studied her face, his eyes softening. "Then why did you follow me that day?" She hesitated, the truth catching in her throat. "Because I couldn't stop wondering who you really were." He looked away toward the distant hills. "Neither could I." Over the next few days, Meadow Ridge transformed. The villagers, once hesitant, began to accept the truth in pieces. They watched in awe as construction teams rebuilt the broken homes, as new wells were dug, and as electricity reached corners of the village that had never known light after dusk. Eli, no, Elias, worked beside him still, sleeves rolled up, face smudged with dirt. But every time someone thanked him, he would shake his head and say, "Don't thank me. Thank the land that kept us alive." Clara followed him everywhere, camera in hand, documenting quietly but never publishing. She didn't know if she was writing a story for the world or for herself anymore. Something about him, the way he carried his pain like a shadow he'd learned to live with, had changed the way she saw everything. One evening, as the orange twilight bled across the sky, she found him sitting alone near the field. He was holding that old gold watch again, the thorn crest glinting faintly in the fading light. "Was it hers?" she asked softly, sitting beside him. He nodded. "It was my father's first, then mine. My fiancée gave it back to me the night I disappeared. She said I'd never escape my name. Maybe she was right." Clara leaned forward. "She's a reason you left?" He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Partly. When you find out the person you trust most is planning to destroy you, something inside you breaks. But it wasn't just her. It was the noise, the greed, the board meetings, the constant pretending. I was surrounded by people, but I'd never been lonelier." She was quiet for a long time. "And now," he looked at her, "now I'm surrounded by silence. But it's the kind I chose." Their eyes met, and something unspoken hung between them. Fragile and alive, the wind rustled through the wheat, and for a moment the world felt still. Then his phone buzzed, a sleek black device that looked out of place in his rough hands. He frowned at the name flashing on the screen. Jonathan Hale, Legal Affairs, Thorn Industries. He answered reluctantly. Clara couldn't hear the other side, but she watched his face darken. "I said I wasn't coming back," he said firmly. "No, I don't care about the board's threats. The company isn't what it was meant to be." A pause. His jaw tightened. "Tell them if they want to talk. They can come to Meadow Ridge. That's where I am now." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, exhaling slowly. "They're coming," he said finally. Clara frowned. "Who?" "The board. My old partners. They found me, and they're not going to let me stay gone this time." Something in his voice carried more than frustration. It carried the sound of old wounds reopening. "What will you do?" she asked. "What I should have done years ago," he murmured. "Face them." But the days that followed brought a strange tension to the village. Sleek cars began appearing on the dusty roads, carrying men and women in expensive suits, their polished shoes sinking into the muddy ground of Meadow Ridge. They looked around with thinly veiled disgust, their whispers slicing through the quiet like knives. Clara watched from a distance as Eli faced them near the half-built schoolhouse. He stood tall, the humble farmer replaced by the commanding presence of a man born to lead empires. "You've made your point," one of them said coldly. "You played this game long enough, Elias. But this place doesn't suit you. The company is falling apart without your direction." Eli's eyes hardened. "Then maybe it should. Maybe it needs to. You're throwing away everything your family built." He took a step closer. "My family built more than numbers and glass towers. They built values, honor, compassion. You traded those for profit years ago." The man scoffed. "And now you're playing savior to peasants? You're out of your mind." Clara could see the fury in Eli's eyes, but he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he said calmly, "If doing good is madness, then maybe sanity was never worth it." The board members exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves. One woman stepped forward. "You know this isn't over. Elias, the press will find out. You can't bury who you are." Eli smiled faintly. "I'm not burying it. I'm finally living it." As the cars drove away, the villagers gathered near him, uncertain what the confrontation meant. But Eli simply turned to them and said, "Keep working. Don't let fear stop what we started." That night, Clara found him again, alone, sitting on the steps of the newly built schoolhouse, staring at the stars. "They'll expose you," she said quietly. "The world will come running again." "I know," he said. "Maybe that's what's supposed to happen. Maybe hiding was never the answer. Maybe this," he gestured toward the fields, the people, the laughter drifting from nearby homes, "was the lesson I needed before I could go back." She sat beside him. "And what about us?" He turned his head, his eyes catching the faint starlight. "That depends," he said softly. "Are you writing a story or living one?" Clara's breath caught in her chest. She didn't answer. In the distance, thunder rolled faintly over the hills, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the city that once owned his soul was stirring, ready to pull him back into its grasp. But for now, in that fragile space between past and future, Elias Thorne, the poor farmer, the hidden billionaire, the man torn between two worlds, sat beside the woman who might yet change everything. The wind carried the scent of rain again, faint, cool, and familiar. It whispered through the wheat fields that Elias had once planted with his bare hands. And for a moment, the land seemed to breathe with him. The same soil that had hidden his secret for years was now the ground where his truth stood uncovered. The poor farmer had become the billionaire once more, but this time he was something else entirely. Days passed, and the world indeed came running. News drones hovered above the fields, reporters flooded Meadow Ridge, and luxury cars lined the muddy roads. Headlines screamed across every screen. Asterisk, missing billionaire found living as a poor farmer. Asterisk cameras followed his every move, snapping pictures of his calloused hands and tattered boots as though they were symbols of rebirth. But Elias wasn't chasing the narrative. He had learned to live without one. He continued to work among the villagers, even as global media broadcast his every breath. When one of the children tugged his sleeve and asked, "Are you really a prince, Mr. Eli?" he only smiled and said, "No, I'm just someone who forgot who he was for a while." The villagers no longer looked at him with fear or awe. Once they saw his heart hadn't changed, their hesitation melted into pride. To them, he was still the man who carried water for old Mrs. Graham when her well broke, still the one who mended their fences, still the farmer who believed the land could heal broken souls. But not everyone shared their faith. The world beyond the village was crueler. His former business associates wanted control back. Investors demanded answers. And the woman he had once loved, the fiancée who betrayed him, returned, drawn by the storm of fame and guilt. Clara was there when it happened. She watched from the edge of the crowd as Isabel, dressed in elegance that didn't belong to this dusty place, stepped out of a sleek black car. Her beauty was striking, but her eyes carried the sharpness of someone who'd never known humility. "Elias," she said, her voice trembling between arrogance and regret. "You disappeared and left me with chaos. You could have had everything, and you threw it away for this?" He turned slowly, his face calm, his posture grounded in the simplicity of truth. "Everything," he said softly, "is what I found here. Do you really think these people care who you are?" she demanded, gesturing at the villagers. "They'll forget you as soon as your money's gone. You belong to the city, to the empire your father built." Elias studied her for a long moment. "I used to believe that," he said quietly. "But maybe my father didn't build an empire. Maybe he built a prison, and I spent my whole life trying to find the key." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that carried finality. Isabel blinked, her mask cracking for a heartbeat before she turned and walked away. The reporters followed her like flies, hungry for drama, but Elias didn't watch. He simply turned toward the villagers, toward Clara, and smiled faintly, not out of victory, but peace. That night, when the noise faded and the cameras withdrew, Clara found him near the barn, where the lantern light flickered against his profile. The same gold watch gleamed faintly on his wrist, a reminder of who he'd been and who he chose to be now. "You handle that well," she said softly. He chuckled. "Years ago, I would have yelled, tried to prove her wrong. But when you stop needing to prove yourself, the world's noise becomes a whisper." She stepped closer, her eyes tracing his face. "You've changed everything here, Eli. You rebuilt the village, gave them a future. But what about you? What happens when the lights leave, when they stop caring?" He looked at her, and for a moment, the mask of calm slipped. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to go back and fix the company, make it what it should have been. Another part of me," his voice trailed off. "Another part of you wants to stay," she finished for him. He met her gaze. "Yes, because for the first time I feel human." The words hung between them, delicate and real. Clara's heart ached with a truth she didn't want to admit. She was falling for him, deeply and helplessly. The man who had run from the world had somehow taught her what it meant to live within it again. But their peace didn't last long. The next week, an urgent message arrived. His company was crumbling. Without his leadership, the board had made reckless decisions. Thousands of jobs were on the line. The empire he'd abandoned was collapsing, and the people he once despised now begged for his return. Elias stood by the village square, the letter in his hand, torn between two worlds once more. "You have to go," Clara said, though her voice was soft, reluctant. "You can't let innocent people pay for what others did wrong." He looked up at her. "If I go back, everything here changes. The peace, the simplicity, the truth I found, it all fades." "Maybe," she whispered, "but maybe peace isn't about where you are. Maybe it's about who you become." He was silent for a long time. The villagers gathered around him, watching the man they loved battle with himself. Old Mr. Graham stepped forward, his weather hand resting on Elias's shoulder. "You gave us hope, son," he said quietly. "Now it's time you give that same hope to your own people." Elias closed his eyes and nodded. When he finally left Meadow Ridge, the entire village gathered at the road to see him off. The children ran beside his car until the dust rose too high, shouting promises that they'd take care of the land until he returned. Clara stood there too, her heart breaking and blooming all at once. He rolled down the window and looked at her. "You'll write it, won't you?" She smiled faintly. "Not as a story," she said. "As a truth." He nodded once, eyes glistening. "Then write it well." And with that, Elias Thorne, the poor farmer, the hidden billionaire, the man who walked between wealth and humility, drove away into a future that awaited his courage. Months passed. The city welcomed him back, not as a missing heir, but as a reborn leader. He reorganized Thorne Industries from the ground up, turning its vast wealth toward rebuilding lives, funding sustainable farms, and creating opportunities for people like those in Meadow Ridge. He refused lavish offices, choosing to work from a simple desk overlooking the countryside. But fame came again, relentless and bright. His face returned to magazine covers. His name lit up the stock markets. And yet, whenever he stood before the flashing cameras, he wore that same calm smile, the smile of a man who had already seen what truly mattered. Meanwhile, Clara's article spread across the world. The farmer who taught a billionaire to be human. It wasn't scandal or spectacle. It was soul. People wept reading it. It reminded them that wealth wasn't gold or glass towers, but kindness, humility, and courage. One evening, months later, when the city lights flickered like distant stars, Elias returned quietly to Meadow Ridge. The new school was finished, the fields greener than ever, the laughter of children echoing across the valley. He walked the same dirt road, feeling the same peace he had once feared to lose. And there she was, Clara, standing by the old oak, her camera hanging from her neck, her eyes glowing with recognition and something deeper. "You came back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled. "I told you I would." They walked together toward the fields, the sunset painting the sky in gold and crimson. The wind carried the soft hum of life. Children playing, elders talking, the faint sound of music from the rebuilt homes. "You rebuilt the empire," she said quietly. "And you rebuilt this place too." He shook his head. "No, I just learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to remember who you are." She looked at him then, really looked. The man who had been both broken and whole, powerful and humble. "And who are you now, Elias Thorne?" He smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting the fire of the fading sun. "I'm a farmer who happens to be rich," he said softly. "But I'm richer for what I found here than I ever was for what I owned there." They stood in silence, the air between them charged with something unspoken, something the world couldn't name but every heart could feel. And as the last light of day dipped below the horizon, Elias reached out and took her hand. The gold watch on his wrist gleamed one last time before the dusk swallowed it whole. In that moment, the story came full circle, not with riches reclaimed or empires restored, but with two souls finding the rarest treasure of all, peace. The world will continue to talk about Elias Thorne, the missing billionaire who lived as a farmer, the man who changed the meaning of success. But for those who truly knew him, the legend wasn't about wealth or power. It was about the man who remembered how to feel. And somewhere in the quiet heart of Meadow Ridge, beneath the wide sky and the whispering wheat, that feeling lived on, eternal, unseen, but alive in every breath of wind that passed through the fields he once called home.